The moment the lawyer read her will, I felt something inside me collapse, as if 10 years of my life had been erased in an instant. My mother-in-law, Margaret Collins, the woman I had fed, bathed, comforted, and protected, had left everything to another daughter-in-law, not me. Not the one who held her hand through every sleepless night, not the one who sacrificed my youth, my health, and almost my marriage. No, she left everything to Emily Carter, the woman who barely visited, who never even called on holidays. I remember sitting there, my hands trembling on my lap, the room spinning around me. My husband, Daniel, sat frozen beside me, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't dare look at me, and maybe that hurt even more. Because at that moment, I realized something. Betrayal doesn't always come in words. Sometimes it comes in silence, the silence of the people you expect to defend you. I couldn't breathe. My body felt heavy, as if the air itself refused to enter my lungs. 10 years, 10 whole years, I had given her my life, and in return, she erased me. The lawyer continued reading, his voice calm, almost clinical. Margaret's house, her savings, her small inherited cabin by the lake, all of it was going to Emily. And then he read a line, written in Margaret's careful hand, that landed like a knife in my chest. I want everything to go to the one who truly cared for me. For a moment, I thought it was me. How could it not be? But reality stabbed me again. She had chosen Emily. I heard Emily's faint gasp of surprise, followed by a soft laugh she tried and failed to hide. She covered her mouth with her hand, lowering her eyes as if embarrassed. But I knew her well enough. That was not embarrassment. That was triumph. I stood up. My knees were shaking, but I forced myself to my feet. The lawyer asked if I was all right. I didn't answer. I didn't trust myself to speak without screaming. I slowly walked, outside, each step feeling like I was dragging chains behind me. When the door shut behind me, the cold November air hit my face, and only then did the tears start falling. Let me start from the beginning, not because I want sympathy, but because the truth deserves to be told. When I married Daniel, his mother, Margaret, was already struggling with her health. She had diabetes, heart issues, and a body weakened by years of stress. Emily, who married Daniel's younger brother, Jason, was always distant from the family. She made it clear early on that she didn't want to deal with old people, as she once casually said during a family dinner. I remember clutching my spoon tighter when she said that, thinking, how can someone speak so carelessly about the woman who raised her husband? But I said nothing. I didn't want conflict. I was still new to the family, still learning their rhythm. When my father-in-law passed away 6 months after our wedding, everything changed. Margaret fell into a deep sadness. She became frail, forgetful, sometimes confused. She needed someone constantly. And somehow, without anyone asking, without anyone deciding, the responsibility fell to me. Maybe it was because I was the eldest daughter-in-law. Maybe it was because I lived just 15 minutes away. Maybe it was because I had always been the one who cared. From that moment on, my life was no longer my own. I woke up at dawn every day to cook breakfast for her. I rushed to her house after work to help her bathe. I checked her medication schedule, cleaned her room, changed her bed sheets when she had accidents, and she had many. My hands smelled of disinfectant and lotion more than perfume. My weekends were not weekends. They were appointments, treatments, grocery runs. Sometimes she would wake in the middle of the night, screaming because she thought she heard her husband calling her. I would drive to her house half asleep, hair tangled, heart pounding, just to sit beside her until she calmed down. I washed her hair. I massaged her swollen legs. I fed her when her hands trembled too hard to hold utensils. And through it all, Emily was nowhere to be found. She visited only on holidays, posing for photos, bringing fruit baskets, but never opening the refrigerator to see what was missing. She smiled sweetly in front of the elders, then walked away the moment attention shifted. But I didn't complain. I didn't expect anything. I didn't even think about the inheritance. All I cared about was making sure Margaret spent her final years with dignity. People called me a saint. They said I was such a devoted daughter-in-law, but they didn't see the nights I cried silently, my hands raw from cleaning, my back aching, my mind exhausted. They didn't see the arguments with Daniel, how I asked for help and he said, "She prefers you, just be patient." Patient, as if patience could refill my empty heart. Still, I never stopped. Even when Margaret resented me because her illness made her forget things. Even when she called me by the wrong name. Even when she scolded me for no reason. Even when she told neighbors I didn't care enough, despite everything I did. Sometimes I wondered why I kept going. Maybe because I saw in her the mother I lost when I was young. Maybe because I believed that kindness always comes back to you. Maybe because I hoped my children would one day treat me with the same care. But today, sitting outside the lawyer's office with my tears mixing with the cold pavement, I finally questioned everything. Had I been naive? Had I wasted 10 years caring for someone who never truly saw me? I heard footsteps behind me. It was Daniel. He stood there quietly, his shadow falling over me. But he didn't touch me. He didn't comfort me. He didn't defend me, and I couldn't forgive that. Finally, he whispered, "Maybe there was a mistake." A mistake? No, this was a choice. A deliberate, cold choice made by the woman I sacrificed everything for. And deep in my bones, I felt something begin to crumble, not just trust, not just hope, but the very foundation of the life I thought I built. What I didn't know then was that this betrayal was only the beginning. I remember that night vividly. I couldn't sleep, even though my body ached from the exhaustion of 10 years of caregiving. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my thoughts a whirlwind of anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. Every memory of Margaret flashed before me, the small smiles she gave me when she remembered who I was, the way she clutched my hand when she was scared, the nights I stayed awake, listening to her shallow breathing, afraid she might stop in the middle of the night, all of it gone, erased by a signature on a piece of paper. I tried to understand. I told myself, maybe she truly thought Emily cared more. Maybe she forgot the years we spent together. Maybe she just didn't realize. But even as I whispered the words, I knew they were lies. I was telling myself to survive the pain, because deep down, I knew. Deep down, I had always known that gratitude wasn't a guarantee. The next morning, I went to Margaret's house one last time before everything was officially handed over to Emily. The house smelled faintly of lavender, a scent Margaret loved. I walked through each room slowly, touching the furniture, remembering where we had laughed, where I had comforted her when she cried, where I had sat beside her while she told me stories about my husband's childhood. Every corner of that house held a fragment of my life, of our shared existence, and now it belonged to someone else. I found her favorite chair by the window, the one she used to sit in while reading her morning paper. I ran my fingers along the worn leather, tracing the curves and creases, and I felt tears burning my eyes. All these years, I thought she knew how much I loved her, I whispered to myself. And maybe she did. But love doesn't always pay off, does it? Daniel tried to reach out to me again, touching my arm lightly as I turned to leave. I flinched. I had spent so many years sacrificing, so many moments bending to his mother's needs, and now, the person I had trusted most, my husband, felt like a stranger. His silence, his lack of support, stung more than Margaret's betrayal ever could. That night, I called my best friend, Rachel. She listened quietly as I poured out my heart, my voice trembling with rage and sorrow. She didn't offer cliches or easy comforts. She just said, "You did what you had to do. You were there. You were present. And that is more than anyone else can ever claim." Her words were like a lifeline, keeping me tethered to the part of myself that still remembered who I was. But even with her support, I couldn't stop thinking about Emily. The way she had smiled in the lawyer's office, triumphant and smug, replayed in my mind over and over. I had known her for years, yet I had never seen this side of her. I realized I had underestimated her cunning, her ability to manipulate situations to her advantage. She hadn't cared about Margaret, she had cared about the legacy, the property, the recognition. And she had gotten it. I spent the next few days in a haze, going through the motions of daily life, but feeling hollow inside. Every time I passed Margaret's house, I felt a pang in my chest, a reminder of what I had lost. I couldn't even tell Daniel how hurt I was. The words seemed to fail me. Our conversations became strained, clipped, filled with unspoken resentment. I started noticing little things, the way he avoided eye contact, the way he softened his voice when speaking about Emily, the way he seemed hesitant to acknowledge my pain. I realized that even the people closest to me could betray me with inaction. One evening, I sat alone in the living room, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea, and I began to reflect on the past 10 years. The sacrifices I had made were countless. I had given up vacations, personal hobbies, even social connections to be there for Margaret. I had held her hand while she cried, wiped her tears, reminded her she was loved, reminded her she mattered. And yet, it had never been enough. My loyalty, my care, my unwavering presence, it had been invisible to her, or worse, irrelevant. It was then that a thought struck me, sharp and cutting. I didn't just lose her inheritance, I lost my trust, my faith in fairness, my belief that kindness would be rewarded. The realization was almost unbearable. I felt a deep, gnawing emptiness, a hollow ache in my chest that no amount of tears could fill. I had poured myself into someone else's life for a decade, and in return, I was left with nothing but memories and pain. But even in that despair, a tiny spark of resolve began to form. I refused to let this define me. I refused to allow Emily's victory to overshadow the life I still had, the family that truly mattered, and the lessons I had learned along the way. I began to think about what I could do, not to fight her directly, but to reclaim a sense of agency, a sense of dignity. I started writing down every memory, every moment I had spent caring for Margaret. I documented the sacrifices, the nights awake, the hours spent tending to her needs. It wasn't for the world to see, it was for me. A reminder that my devotion had meaning, even if it went unrecognized by the person it was directed toward. In the weeks that followed, I slowly began to distance myself from Margaret's house. I stopped calling, stopped checking in on the property, and allowed the legal transfer to take place without interference. The process was quiet, almost anticlimactic, and yet it felt like a release. With each day, I reclaimed a little piece of my own life, a little piece of the identity I had lost in service to someone else. Then came the confrontation I hadn't expected. Emily, emboldened by her inheritance, reached out to me one afternoon. She arrived at my doorstep with a forced smile, her tone saccharine as she spoke. "I just wanted to thank you for taking care of Mom all these years," she said, her eyes glinting with something I couldn't quite place. Gratitude? Maybe. Triumph? Definitely. I invited her in, sitting across from her at the kitchen table, my hands folded in my lap. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply listened as she spoke, nodding occasionally, letting her words wash over me. Inside, however, I felt a storm brewing. I thought of every night I had stayed awake, every meal I had prepared, every tear I had wiped away, and the injustice of it all made my stomach churn. When she finally paused, I looked her straight in the eyes and said, "You may have everything she left behind, but you don't have what I had, her trust, her reliance, her heart. And that is something no inheritance can ever buy." Her smile faltered slightly, and I knew I had struck a nerve. For the first time, I realized that my power wasn't in legal claims or property. It was in the truth of my actions, the depth of my love, and the integrity I had maintained despite betrayal. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Release. A weight lifted from my chest. the burden of years of unacknowledged care slowly dissolving. I had been invisible in Margaret's eyes. Yes. But I had never been invisible in my own. I knew the road ahead would still be painful. Family gatherings would be awkward. Daniel and I would need to rebuild trust and communication. But I also knew that I had survived a trial more challenging than most, the betrayal of someone I had loved unconditionally, and surviving it meant I was stronger than I had ever realized. That night, I sat by my window, staring at the stars and thinking about the future. I realized that care and devotion are not debts to be repaid. They are choices, and those choices define us. I had chosen love, compassion, and loyalty, and even if others couldn't recognize it, I could. That was enough. The next morning, I decided to step back completely from Margaret's life. The house, the belongings, the memories, all belonged to Emily now. But the emotional residue lingered, heavy and suffocating. Every time Daniel mentioned his mother, I felt a tightness in my chest. I started avoiding conversations, turning my focus to my own family, my own children, trying desperately to reclaim the part of life I had neglected for a decade. Even though I tried to push it aside, questions gnawed at me like persistent shadows. How could Margaret have forgotten everything I did for her? Was Emily really the one she felt cared for her the most? Or was it some manipulation, some final act of favoritism that left me utterly blindsided? I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been deliberately erased from her life's final chapter. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I began to understand the deeper layers of the betrayal. A neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, who had known Margaret for years, came to visit me. She hesitated at the door, clutching her purse tightly, before speaking. "I didn't want you to find out this way," she said softly. "But Margaret always liked Emily's company better. You did everything for her, but I think she saw you more as an obligation than as someone she loved." Her words cut through me like ice. I had spent years believing that my devotion would matter, that my sacrifices would be meaningful, and now, in one sentence, the truth, bitter and sharp, shattered that illusion. I felt anger rise, hot and furious, bubbling in my chest. How could someone I had loved, nurtured, and protected see me as a burden? How could all those nights of tending to her needs, the tears I wiped, the meals I cooked, count for nothing in her eyes? I confronted Daniel that evening. The air between us was thick with tension as I demanded the truth. Did she ever truly care about me? Or was I just convenient? My voice trembled, a mixture of rage and sorrow. Daniel's face darkened, conflicted. I don't know, Claire," he admitted. "I think she appreciated you, but she was stubborn. She had her favorites. I tried to talk to her about it, but she wouldn't listen. And when it came to the will, I think she made her choice long before she ever got sick. Long before she got sick." Those words repeated in my mind like a curse. Everything I had done, the years of labor, love, and care, had been invisible all along. And yet, the worst part wasn't just Margaret's betrayal. It was the realization that Daniel had known, that he had understood the preference, and yet had done little to intervene. His silence had been its own form of betrayal. In the days that followed, I struggled with a complicated storm of emotions. I felt grief, yes, but also an unexpected clarity. I realized that Margaret's choices, as hurtful as they were, didn't define me. My care for her, my dedication, my sacrifices, those were still mine. Those moments of tenderness, those acts of love, couldn't be stolen from me. They were my legacy, even if the world didn't recognize them. But Emily's presence loomed over everything. She began coming by the neighborhood more frequently, as if to assert her claim over Margaret's life and memory. Every time I saw her, perfectly composed, smiling, it felt like a challenge. I wanted to lash out, to scream, to make her see that what she had taken was not hers to command. But instead, I held my tongue. I realized that my power was not in confrontation, but in composure, in owning my own story rather than being defined by her triumph. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. It was from Margaret herself, written in her familiar, deliberate hand. My hands shook as I opened it. The words inside were strange, half apology, half confession. She wrote about her regrets, about forgetting moments, about seeing Emily in ways that perhaps I hadn't understood. But what hit me most was this line: "I know I hurt you, and I hope one day you can forgive me, even if you cannot understand my choices." I read it again and again, and each time my heart tightened. How could someone I had loved so much, someone I had sacrificed everything for, write these words without any real clarity? It was not closure. It was a reminder that sometimes love is flawed, that people's hearts are unpredictable, and that the people we serve may never reward us in ways we expect. But rather than feeling defeated, I felt a strange sense of liberation. I understood, finally, that my path was no longer bound to Margaret or her legacy. I had a life to rebuild, relationships to nurture, and self-respect to reclaim. For years, I had measured my worth by her approval, by her recognition, by her gratitude. And now, I realized that my worth was independent of her judgment. I began to focus on small things first. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected, took long walks I had skipped while caring for Margaret, and devoted time to my children in ways I hadn't allowed myself. I started cooking for pleasure rather than obligation, decorating my home for myself rather than for anyone else's comfort. Each action was a small act of rebellion against the years I had given away, each step a reclaiming of myself. Emily tried to engage me during this period, attempting casual conversations and subtle attempts to maintain dominance in family gatherings. But I had changed. I no longer needed her acknowledgement. I no longer needed her to validate the care I had given. I could see through her politeness, her smiles, her manipulations. I had survived her victory, and I was stronger for it. One evening, Daniel and I finally had a long, honest conversation. We sat together on the couch, the weight of months pressing down on us. I spoke openly about my pain, my anger, and my disillusionment. He listened, and for the first time in years, truly, listened without offering excuses. In that moment, I realized that the betrayal, as devastating as it had given me a rare gift, the ability to communicate honestly, without fear or pretense. As I spoke, I felt something shift inside me. The resentment that had weighed me down began to lift. I understood that Margaret's choices, Emily's triumphs, and even Daniel's hesitation could not define me. I had survived the storm, and I had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more attuned to the value of my own life and my own love. I knew the road ahead would not be simple. Family gatherings would remain tense. Emily's presence would continue to be a reminder of what had been taken. But I also knew that I had a choice: to live in bitterness or to reclaim my joy. I chose the latter. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope, a hope rooted not in external validation, but in the recognition of my own strength, my own love, and my own worth. I realized that caring for someone, even when it goes unrecognized, is never wasted. It shapes us, it teaches us, and it reveals the depths of our capacity for empathy and resilience. And so, I began to live again, not as a daughter-in-law defined by another person's judgment, but as Claire Harrison, a woman who had endured, who had loved fiercely, and who had survived betrayal without losing herself. The weeks turned into months, and life slowly began to find a new rhythm. Margaret's house no longer loomed over my thoughts like a shadow, yet the emptiness she left behind sometimes returned at unexpected moments. I would walk past the corner store where we used to stop after her doctor's appointments, or pass her favorite park bench by the lake, and memories would wash over me like a cold wave. I had cared for her with everything I had, and the absence of acknowledgement still ached, even as I tried to move forward. Daniel noticed the change in me, the shift from despair to quiet strength. He no longer tried to console me with half-hearted reassurances or excuses for his mother. Instead, he became present, truly present, in small, meaningful ways. He took the kids to school, cooked dinner occasionally, and, most importantly, he began listening without judgment. The tension between us eased slightly, but I knew some fractures could never fully heal. Trust, once broken, leaves a mark that no apology can erase. One afternoon, a family gathering was scheduled at Emily and Jason's home. I debated whether to attend. Part of me wanted to avoid her, to escape the tension, to shield myself from the inevitable reminders of betrayal. But another part, a deeper, stubborn part, wanted to face it, to reclaim my presence and my dignity. I decided to go. Walking into their house, everything seemed staged for appearances. Emily greeted me with a polished smile, a gleam in her eyes that had become all too familiar. "Claire, I'm so glad you could make it," she said, her tone sweet but carefully measured. Her words were empty, but I had learned to navigate that kind of performance. I smiled politely, acknowledging her greeting, without giving her the satisfaction of seeing me falter. The gathering began with casual chatter, small talk about work, weather, and the children's activities. Yet beneath the surface, I felt the subtle tension of unspoken competition. Emily attempted to assert dominance subtly, sharing stories of Margaret's final days and hinting at her own care, carefully crafted to appear devoted. But I had learned to see through the performative gestures. Her words were hollow. Her presence was calculated. Later, when everyone had moved to the living room for dessert, Emily approached me directly. I could feel the weight of her gaze, sharp and assessing. "Claire," she began, her voice soft, "I just wanted to say, I appreciate what you did for Mom. I know it wasn't easy." I paused, considering my response carefully. I could have unleashed the years of anger and hurt I carried inside, could have told her everything I felt, but instead, I chose restraint. "Thank you, Emily," I said, my voice calm and steady. It meant a lot to me to be there for her. That's something no one can take away from me. Her eyes flickered with something unreadable surprise, perhaps, or the recognition that her triumph could not diminish the depth of my devotion. She smiled, but it was no longer victorious. I realized then that the true power lay not in inheritance or approval, but in the unwavering truth of one's actions. I had given love and care freely, and that truth could never be erased by a signature on a will. After the gathering, I walked home with Daniel and the children. The crisp evening air felt liberating, as if each breath carried away a little more of the resentment and grief. I realized that moving forward required not just letting go of Margaret and Emily, but also redefining my own life, my own priorities, and my own sense of self-worth. In the following weeks, I focused on rebuilding connections I had neglected over the years. I called old friends, attended community events, and devoted time to my children in ways I hadn't allowed myself before. Cooking became a joy again, no longer a duty, and I began to invest in my own well-being, from exercise to hobbies I had once abandoned. Slowly, life regained color, depth, and purpose. One evening, while reading in my study, I received an unexpected message from Emily. She wanted to meet, to talk things over, she said. My first instinct was to ignore it. Why open the door to someone who had caused so much pain? But something inside me, perhaps curiosity, perhaps the desire for closure, made me agree. We met at a quiet cafe. She arrived with the same polished demeanor, but this time, there was an undercurrent of hesitation. "Claire," she said, "I know things have been difficult between us. I wanted to understand why things turned out the way they did." I studied her carefully. For years, I had imagined confrontations filled with anger, tears, and recrimination. But now, sitting across from her, I felt neither fury nor need for vengeance. Instead, I felt clarity and calm. "Emily," I said, "I don't expect you to understand everything. What matters is that we both move We can acknowledge the past without letting it define our future. She nodded slowly, as if absorbing the weight of my words. I think I underestimated what you did, she admitted quietly. I focused on the inheritance, on appearances, and I didn't see the depth of your care. I'm sorry. Her apology was not a magical balm, nor did it erase the years of pain. But it was an acknowledgement, a recognition that had been absent for so long. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Closure doesn't always come from restitution or recognition. Sometimes, it comes from witnessing the acknowledgement itself, from understanding that the other person sees, at last, the truth of your devotion. Over the next few months, Emily and I developed an uneasy but respectful understanding. We weren't friends, not in the way I had once hoped for, but we were no longer adversaries. The tension in family gatherings eased slightly, and Daniel began to speak more openly with me about his own regrets and frustrations over the years. Our marriage, tested by betrayal and silence, began to find a new balance, one built on honesty, communication, and the shared commitment to our children. Through it all, I learned a vital lesson about love, loyalty, and resilience. Caring for someone, even when it goes unrecognized, is never wasted. It shapes you, tests you, and ultimately reveals the depth of your capacity for compassion. And while betrayal may leave scars, it also illuminates strength you didn't know you possessed. I started volunteering at a local senior center, using the skills I had honed caring for Margaret to help others who were lonely or struggling with illness. Each smile, each word of gratitude from those I helped, reminded me that my love and devotion had purpose beyond family ties or inheritance. It was a gift I could give freely, without expectation of reward. And as the seasons changed, bringing crisp autumn air and golden leaves, I felt a quiet sense of peace. I had survived the betrayal of someone I had loved unconditionally. I had faced the challenge of losing not just material inheritance, but recognition and approval. And in doing so, I had discovered something far more valuable: the power to define my own worth, to reclaim my own life, and to continue loving without fear of being diminished. The shadow of Margaret's choice would always linger, a reminder of pain and disappointment, but it no longer controlled me. I was no longer the anxious, self-sacrificing daughter-in-law who had lived in the service of someone else's needs. I was Claire Harrison, a woman who had endured, who had loved fiercely, and who had emerged stronger, wiser, and more self-assured than ever before. Even with the uneasy truce between Emily and me, life continued to test my patience and resilience. Family gatherings still carried an undercurrent of tension, subtle glances, whispered comments, and moments of awkward politeness, but I had learned to navigate these waters with a quiet strength. I no longer allowed Emily's presence to define my mood or dictate my reactions. I had reclaimed a sense of autonomy that was entirely mine. One afternoon, Daniel and I were at home discussing the future when our eldest son, Ethan, brought up college plans. I realized, with a pang of regret, how much of his childhood I had missed while caring for Margaret. Those lost years could never be reclaimed, but I was determined to be fully present now. I promised myself I would not let future milestones slip by unnoticed. I wanted to be the mother my children needed, the mother I hadn't always been able to be. Around the same time, I began receiving letters from distant relatives of Margaret. They had heard about her passing and the distribution of her estate, and wanted to express their condolences. Some of the letters included memories of Margaret that I had never known, stories of her youth, her friendships, her fears and dreams. Reading them, I felt a connection to the woman she had been before illness and old age had shaped her final years. It was bittersweet. I could mourn the Margaret I had known and the Margaret she had once been at the same time. But the most shocking development came unexpectedly. One morning, Daniel called me, voice tight with unease. "Claire, you should see this," he said. On his phone was a series of photos sent anonymously, showing Emily at Margaret's house before the will was executed. She was arranging furniture, photographing rooms, even taking notes in a small notebook. The images made my stomach churn. I realized that Emily's careful, sweet demeanor in public masked something far more calculating. She had been planning, subtly maneuvering, and positioning herself to claim the inheritance long before Margaret's final days. My mind reeled with disbelief and fury. For 10 years, I had devoted myself entirely to Margaret's care, often at great personal cost. And here was Emily, scheming behind the scenes, ensuring that the property and money would go to her. I felt the familiar sting of betrayal, more intense this time because it was deliberate and methodical. Every act of kindness I had shown, every sacrifice I had made, seemed to have been taken for granted. I confronted Daniel with the photos. His face was grim. "I suspected it," he admitted. "I tried to tell you, but I didn't have proof. I didn't want to hurt you further." I thought maybe Margaret's mind was playing tricks on her. But now, it's clear. I felt a mix of vindication and bitterness. On one hand, I had finally confirmed my suspicions. On the other hand, the confirmation offered no solace. Emily's victory was still real. The legal transfer had been completed. My years of care were still invisible in any tangible sense. I realized then that the only way to truly reclaim my peace was not to dwell on the injustice, but to assert my dignity in the only sphere I could control my own life. I focused on my family, my health, and the relationships I could nurture. I refused to let anger consume me, even as it burned quietly beneath the surface. The confrontation with Emily, however, was inevitable. At a later family event, she approached me again, attempting her usual charm. But this time, I was prepared. I met her gaze steadily, refusing to give her any hint of weakness or resentment. "Emily," I said calmly, "I know what you did. You planned carefully, and it worked in your favor. But that does not change the years of care I gave Margaret. That cannot be taken from me." Her smile faltered. I saw the calculation in her eyes, the realization that while she had claimed the material, inheritance, she could never claim the love, loyalty, and devotion I had freely given. For a moment, I felt a quiet triumph not over her, but over the injustice itself. I had survived it, endured it, and emerged stronger. In the months that followed, my life began to fill with small victories and quiet joys. I took a trip with Daniel and the children to the mountains, something I had always postponed while caring for Margaret. I reconnected with old friends, spent weekends enjoying hobbies I had abandoned, and allowed myself to laugh freely again. Each day was a reclamation of my time, energy, and spirit. I also found solace in writing. I began journaling the events of the past 10 years, recording not only the pain and betrayal but also the moments of tenderness, the lessons learned, and the strength I had discovered within myself. Writing became a way to process the complexity of emotions I carried, and to document the truth that no one else could take from me. One evening, as I read through my journal, Daniel came into the room and sat beside me. He reached for my hand, and I didn't pull away. "I know this has been incredibly hard," he said softly. "I wish I had done more, said more, years ago. But I'm proud of you. You've endured so much and come out stronger." His words, simple yet sincere, brought a quiet warmth to my heart. I realized that while the past could never be changed, the present and the future were still mine to shape. I had survived betrayal, reclaimed my autonomy, and rebuilt my family life in the process. Emily's shadow still lingered at family gatherings, but it no longer had power over me. I could smile politely, engage briefly, and then step away, secure in the knowledge that her victory could not diminish the truth of my actions. I had cared for Margaret not for recognition, not for inheritance, but because it was the right thing to do, and that truth, immutable and unshakable, was my own. As autumn deepened into winter, I felt a sense of closure beginning to settle over me. The pain of betrayal remained, but it had softened, tempered by resilience and perspective. I knew that life would continue to present challenges, that not everyone would act with fairness or gratitude. But I also knew that my response to those challenges defined me, not the actions of others. Through it all, I learned the most valuable lesson of all: love and care, even when unreciprocated, are never wasted. They shape us, strengthen us, and reveal the depths of our capacity for empathy and resilience. Betrayal can wound, but it cannot erase the truth of who we are or the legacy of our actions. And so, I moved forward, carrying the lessons of the past with me, but no longer burdened by the weight of resentment. I embraced life with renewed purpose, focusing on my family, my own growth, and the quiet, enduring satisfaction of a life lived with integrity. I had endured the ultimate betrayal, and I had survived. I had been invisible in the eyes of those who mattered little, and yet I had never been invisible to myself. And in that, I found a strength and a peace that no inheritance, no betrayal, and no manipulation could ever take away. Spring came slowly that year, and with it, a sense of renewal. I could feel the warmth seeping back into my life, a contrast to the long, cold winter that had followed Margaret's passing. I had rebuilt routines that were mine alone: early morning walks along the river with Daniel, afternoons spent reading with Ethan and Lily, weekends dedicated to cooking meals we all enjoyed together rather than for someone else's approval. Each day felt like a reclamation of self, a gentle but deliberate undoing of years spent in quiet servitude. Yet even in this newfound stability, the echoes of the past remained. I would sometimes find myself staring at Emily's name on a group text, or passing her house on the corner, a pang of tension surfacing unexpectedly. But those moments no longer had the power to consume me. They were shadows I could acknowledge without letting them define my present. I had grown stronger, sharper, and more attuned to my own boundaries. Then one evening, an unexpected opportunity arose. A local senior center was seeking volunteers to help with wellness programs for older adults. Without hesitation, I signed up. It felt like a natural extension of everything I had done for Margaret, a way to channel my care and experience into something meaningful for the community rather than a single individual. I spent hours teaching cooking classes, leading gentle exercise routines, and simply sitting with residents who needed conversation and companionship. Each smile, each word of thanks, reminded me that my dedication had value beyond familial expectations. During one of these sessions, a woman approached me after class. She was small, frail, and hunched, yet her eyes were sharp and attentive. "You remind me of someone," she said softly. "Someone who cared deeply, even when it wasn't recognized." Her words struck me. For years, I had measured my worth through Margaret's acknowledgement, through Daniel's subtle gestures of approval, through society's limited understanding of duty. And now, someone completely outside my family had recognized the depth of my devotion. The validation was quiet, almost imperceptible, yet it felt more powerful than any legal document ever could. Meanwhile, tensions in the extended family began to reveal themselves in subtle but telling ways. Emily, despite her inheritance, could not escape the disapproval of other relatives who had witnessed her behavior during Margaret's final years. Whispered comments about her opportunism reached me indirectly, a strange satisfaction that the truth of her actions was slowly surfacing, even if she remained oblivious. It wasn't revenge, not in the traditional sense, but it was a quiet confirmation that appearances could only go so far, and integrity mattered in ways that material gain never could. Daniel and I continued to navigate the complexities of our relationship. He had grown more attentive, more present, recognizing the depth of my pain and the extent of my endurance. One night, as we sat together on the porch, watching the sunset over the neighborhood park, he turned to me and said, "I can't undo the past, Claire, but I want to be better. For us, for the kids, for you." His voice held a sincerity that broke through years of accumulated tension. I reached for his hand, feeling the warmth of shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement that we could rebuild what had been fractured. It was in these quiet moments that I truly realized the significance of survival. The betrayal, while profound, had revealed hidden reservoirs of strength within me. I had learned to define my worth independently, to embrace self-care, and to cultivate relationships that were reciprocal rather than imposed. I understood, finally, that the depth of one's compassion did not guarantee recognition, but it did guarantee growth, resilience, and the capacity to shape one's own destiny. One weekend, I found myself back at Margaret's house, this time to attend to the formalities of the property sale that Emily had initiated. Walking through the rooms, I felt a mixture of nostalgia and detachment. Each corner held memories of moments spent in service, but now those memories belonged solely to me. No one could take them. I ran my fingers along the counter where Margaret had once leaned while telling me stories of her youth, and I allowed myself a small smile. The past was mine to remember, and it would remain intact, untouched by others' claims or judgments. Emily was there briefly, overseeing the process with a professional, controlled demeanor. I maintained my composure, speaking politely but firmly. There was no triumph in my voice, only a quiet acknowledgement of the facts. She tried to engage in conversation, perhaps seeking validation or reconciliation, but I had learned the power of silence and the dignity of restraint. My calm, measured presence communicated what words never could, that my value and integrity were independent of her recognition. As I left the house, I felt a profound sense of closure. Margaret's world, her possessions, and her final decisions were no longer entangled with my life. I had been invisible in her eyes, yes, but I had never been invisible to myself, and that realization brought a peace that no legal victory or inheritance could ever provide. In the months that followed, I focused entirely on building the life I wanted. My children flourished under my renewed attention and care. Daniel and I grew closer, and my involvement with the senior center provided a sense of purpose that transcended personal grievances. I had discovered a rhythm, a balance between duty and joy, between care for others and care for myself. The final confrontation with Emily, while unnecessary in many ways, became a symbolic closure. She attempted a conversation during a family holiday, again trying to assert her narrative. But this time, I listened without reaction, offering no validation, no anger, only a quiet acknowledgement. In that silence, the dynamic had shifted. I was no longer vulnerable to her manipulations, no longer dependent on her recognition. I had claimed my own narrative, and it was stronger than any legal document could ever be. Looking back, I realized that the journey through betrayal, grief, and disappointment had been transformative. I had learned the fragility of trust, the complexity of human motives, and the resilience required to endure profound emotional challenges. But most importantly, I had learned to prioritize my own sense of worth and dignity. The world could be unjust, people could act selfishly, and life could deal cruel blows, but how we respond defines the trajectory of our future. By the time the first snow fell, covering the neighborhood in a soft, quiet blanket, I felt a serene strength that I had never known before. I had survived betrayal, reclaimed my life, and discovered the power of self-respect and inner fortitude. The pain would always remain, but it had been tempered into wisdom and clarity. I understood, finally, that the value of my devotion could not be measured by others' recognition. It was a testament to my character, my love, and my resilience. Winter deepened, and with it came the quiet reflection that only the cold, still nights can bring. Sitting by the fire one evening, I thought about everything that had transpired over the past year. Margaret's passing, Emily's calculated triumph, the long months of grief, and my slow journey back to myself. The pain had not vanished, it never truly does, but it had transformed. It was no longer a heavy, crushing weight. It had become a reminder of resilience, a marker of survival, Daniel and I had grown closer than I thought possible. We spent hours talking, sometimes about mundane things, sometimes about the deep fractures of the past. He admitted mistakes, moments when he had remained silent or hesitant, and I forgave him. Not because forgetting was easy, but because holding on to anger would have chained me to the past. Together, we forged a new understanding, one built on honesty, presence, and mutual respect. The children noticed the difference, too. They saw their mother, once consumed by duty and the heartbreak of betrayal, now more present, more joyful, more fully herself. Ethan laughed more freely. Lily clung to me during bedtime stories without distraction, and the household, once weighted with invisible sorrow, now vibrated with warmth and renewal. It was a quiet victory, but a profound one, the reclamation of a life lived with intention and love. Emily, despite her inheritance, had begun to reveal cracks in her polished veneer. She could not mask her growing anxiety at family events, the subtle discomfort that came from realizing that material success could not replicate the intimacy, trust, and love that had defined my relationship with Margaret, flawed as it had been. The whispers of other relatives, once silent, now highlighted her opportunism. I noticed, but I did not gloat. Instead, I felt a quiet affirmation that integrity, even in the absence of recognition, holds power. One evening, a surprise visit arrived from Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who had once told me about Margaret's preference for Emily. She brought a small package, a collection of Margaret's letters and photographs that had been tucked away in a drawer. "I thought you should have these," she said gently. I opened them with trembling hands, finding notes where Margaret had written about moments of laughter, gratitude, and even dependence on me. The words were inconsistent with the will, full of warmth and acknowledgement that had never reached me in life but now came to me posthumously. Tears streamed down my face as I read them. The betrayal remained, unmitigated in terms of legal inheritance, but the personal recognition, though delayed, touched a part of my heart I had not realized was still aching. I understood then that gratitude often arrives too late from those we love, but that does not diminish the significance of our actions. I began writing in earnest, crafting the story of the past decade. Not for anyone else, but for myself, a detailed narrative of devotion, heartbreak, betrayal, and growth. Each sentence was a reclaiming of my identity, each paragraph a testament to endurance and love that had never wavered. Writing became cathartic, a way to honor the life I had led and the strength I had found. Emily attempted a final encounter at one of the seasonal family gatherings. She approached me with a forced smile, perhaps hoping for reconciliation, or perhaps seeking validation of her choices. I listened politely as she spoke, her words carefully measured, but I did not respond in the way she expected. There was no anger, no accusations, no acknowledgement of her victory, only calm, quiet composure. In that moment, I realized that my power lay not in confrontation, but in having survived, having endured, and having claimed my life despite the betrayal. That evening, after everyone had left, Daniel and I sat together in the living room, watching the snow fall. I felt a profound sense of peace, an awareness that the trials of the past years had forged a new clarity in me. I had survived the ultimate betrayal, the erasure of a decade of devotion, and yet I had emerged intact, stronger, and more self-aware than I could have imagined. The final lesson crystallized over time. Life may deal unfair blows, loved ones may betray, and recognition may arrive too late or not at all. But the depth of our compassion, the choices we make in service of others, and the integrity with which we live our lives cannot be taken away. They belong to us alone, immutable and enduring. In the quiet of the night, I reflected on Margaret, Emily, Daniel, and myself. I understood that forgiveness is not about absolving wrongs for the sake of others, but about freeing oneself from the chains of resentment. I forgave not to excuse the betrayal, but but to release its grip on my heart and reclaim my capacity for joy. The house, once filled with tension and memories of unacknowledged sacrifice, now felt like a sanctuary. Every laugh of my children, every shared glance with Daniel, and every small act of daily life became a reminder that I had rebuilt a meaningful existence. I was no longer defined by someone else's choices or judgments. I had survived, endured, and ultimately thrived. I realized that love does not die in betrayal, it transforms. My love for Margaret, once met with indifference and ultimately overshadowed by Emily's cunning, had not been wasted. It had shaped me, revealed my strength, and prepared me to embrace life fully, with a heart capable of enduring loss, yet still open to connection. As I watched the snow blanket the quiet neighborhood, I felt a serene clarity. The pain would always be a part of my story, but it was no longer a prison. I had reclaimed my voice, my agency, and my life. I had learned that dignity and self-respect are the truest forms of victory, far beyond material inheritance or external acknowledgement. In the end, Margaret's choices did not define me. Emily's triumph did not diminish me, and Daniel's support, finally genuine and unwavering, reminded me that trust could be rebuilt with patience and honesty. I had survived betrayal, reclaimed my life, and discovered a profound strength within myself that no one could take away. And so, with the snow falling softly outside and the warmth of family within, I understood that the truest inheritance is not what is left to us in a will, but what we carry within: courage, resilience, and the unwavering knowledge of our own worth. In the end, I lost Margaret's approval but found my own strength. Thank you for following our story, a journey full of emotions. If this story touches your heart, please like the video and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on more deeply touching stories every day.